I'm leaning back in the chair, one hand wrapped around a warm mug of tea, the other flipping through an old magazine I picked up from the thrift store on the corner. The early November chill seeps through every crevice of my tiny apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Outside the window, the dull gray sky looks like it's attempting to press snow onto the earth, yet remains strangely silent. The phone rings, abruptly breaking the delicate stillness. I glance at the screen, Dad. My breath catches for a moment. I hit the speaker button, unwilling to let myself expect anything good. Emily, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year, his voice says casually, as if he were mentioning buying more toilet paper. For a second, I think I misheard. I'm sorry, what? We just think it's better if you stayed put, he continues without hesitation, like he'd rehearsed it over and over. To keep things peaceful. Mandy's been a little on edge lately, you know. I set the teacup down on the table. The sound of ceramic tapping wood is sharp and dry. Mandy. Again. Mandy, my sister. The golden child who's never had to be held accountable for anything. Every time there's a conflict, the whole family walks on eggshells just to make sure she feels at ease. So, what you're telling me is I'm not welcome just because Mandy gets stressed? I articulate every word, trying to keep my voice level, though my throat is tightening. My dad sighs, that familiar sigh that means, don't turn this into something. It's just one day, Emily. You'll be all right. I shoot up from the chair, its wooden legs creaking beneath me in protest. Just one day. I echo, my voice now as icy as the frost forming outside. You say that after I've sent over $4,800 to the house since January just to keep the furnace running? There's silence on the other end, only the faint buzz of the phone lines stretching the gap between us. Don't bring money into this, he finally says, sounding slightly rattled. You volunteered to help. I let out a dry, hollow laugh that echoes through the empty room. Volunteered? Back in January, when the heating bill spiked and you called at midnight saying the house was freezing, who paid it?
Me.
In March, when Mom cried because the furnace was making strange noises, who found the repair guy?
Me again.
And in September, when Mandy blew through most of her savings on her podcast venture, who covered the fall heating oil? Still me. He doesn't argue, just falls back on the same exhausted line. Family is family, Emily. But this time, Mandy really needs peace. She's been through a lot. I gaze out the window, where the glass is fogging over. Snow has begun falling, tiny flakes silently layering the pavement. I've been through a lot too, but I was never given that kind of importance. He tries to keep his tone steady, but I can hear the irritation creeping in. Don't make this uncomfortable. It's not personal. I take a deep breath, fingers gripping the edge of the table. Then don't expect another cent from me this winter. If I'm not considered part of the family, don't treat me like one. I end the call before he can reply. The screen fades to black, just like my expression. Outside, the snow keeps falling, cold, silent, but not quieter than the room I now stand in. I sit on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, my mind tangled like the old phone chargers in the kitchen drawer. That brief phone call replays in my head like a broken record. They really did it, left me out of Thanksgiving as casually as canceling a haircut appointment. My eyes land on a small photo on the shelf. Me and my parents during Thanksgiving of 2019. I had just started my first job at the shipping company. Low wages, long hours, but I still took a bus home just to eat Mom's roast chicken and listen to Dad grumble about his football team. That warmth now feels like a dusty memory. I stand, walk to my desk, and open the laptop. Wind howls outside, slipping through the old window frame, sharp and bitter. I log into the utility payment account, the one I created for them last winter after Mom sobbed on the phone about being too cold. I was the one who called the oil company each month. I was the one who paid the bills. Over $2,400 last year. $4,800 this year. Just to keep them warm. I did it not because they asked, but because I thought helping family through hard times was the right thing to do. I used to think that kind of support didn't come with strings, until I became the leftover piece. I opened the Excel sheet where I quietly tracked every payment. The last entry reads, 10 months ago, $400 sent before the cold hit, so they wouldn't have to worry. I wonder, do they even remember? I watched Mandy burn through nearly $16,000 of our parents' savings in 4 months. Her artisan candle business sounded creative until she ordered over 1,000 candles from a mass production facility in Texas, slapped on homemade labels, and tried to sell them for triple the price. Nobody bought them. The stockpile still sits in the garage. And my parents? Instead of confronting her or holding her responsible, they just sighed and said, "She's young. Everyone makes mistakes." I didn't say a word, just quietly transferred more money to help them get through the winter. Meanwhile, Mandy kept posting pictures on Instagram, $7 lattes at vintage cafes, brunches with friends while wearing the latest Zara coat. Every time I scrolled past one, my hand would drift to my back, still aching from a 10-hour shift unloading cargo. I nearly texted to ask why. But then I thought, maybe it's something I'll never completely understand or accept. I turned back to the screen, the cursor blinking over the cancel service button. Just one click, and the system would stop the automatic payments starting next month. I sat in silence for a long time, not because I was uncertain, but because I was allowing myself to remember what it used to feel like to be important to them. Then I clicked. A notification popped up. Service will end on November 2nd, for weeks before Thanksgiving. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Snow was falling now, each flake as weightless as my father's words during that phone call. Except snow, when it falls long enough, can freeze an entire house. They'll notice, but not immediately. Mandy will continue believing the universe orbits around her. Mom will try to overlook it until her fingers go numb while she's preparing dinner. And Dad? He'll get angry like always. But he won't be able to ignore that he's the one who told me to stay away. Part of me felt hollow, like I had let go of something meaningful. But another part, the one that woke up the third time I had to choose between buying a new coat or sending money home, felt lighter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was standing up for myself. And I knew this winter would be long, but at least I wouldn't be the one left shivering because of someone else's decision. I began waking earlier. Not because my job had changed, but because sleep hadn't been peaceful since that call. In the days following the cancellation of my parents' heating service, I carried a constant weight, like walking a tightrope. Half relief, half uncertainty. But each morning, when I got out of bed and my feet touched the cold floor of this small but quiet apartment, I remembered why I had done it. On November 2nd, the system officially sent confirmation. The heating oil service for the house at 422 Elm Street had been terminated. I read the message while sipping coffee in the kitchen, the little space heater buzzing gently by my feet, a quiet kind of comfort I had bought for myself, piece by piece, through every extra shift. That day, the snow fell unusually thick. Minneapolis was already cold, but this year, winter seemed to arrive a few weeks early. I thought about my parents' two-story house, the home I grew up in, with its old shingles and drafty windows, where the cold could slip in after just one night without heat. I didn't feel joy picturing them wrapped in winter coats. But I didn't feel guilty either. It was time they learned that kindness is not an obligation, especially when it's taken for granted. 4 days later, the first message arrived from Mom. "Emily, the heating system seems to be acting up. Can you check it for me?" I stared at the message, then put the phone down. I didn't respond. That evening, I received a text from Mandy, just one line, so immature. No greeting, no question, just judgment as always. She probably assumed I'd react, rush to explain, maybe even apologize. Instead, I simply switched my phone to silent. On the 7th day, Dad called. I let it ring until it stopped. 3 minutes later, a voicemail appeared. "Emily, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me." His voice was sharp, a mixture of frustration and worry. I didn't listen to the voicemail. Instead, I went to the bookstore on Lake Street, bought a new novel, and spent hours at the cafe next door, where the heater roared and the scent of warm cinnamon waffles filled the air. I allowed myself to enjoy something I had always postponed, time for myself. On the 10th day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was the heating oil provider. Hi, is this Miss Emily? Are you planning to renew service for the house at 422 Elm Street? We haven't heard from the homeowners, and the previous contract was under your name. I answered clearly.
No.
The contract was canceled and will not be renewed. I'm no longer responsible for that house. I see, the rep said, hesitating slightly. So, just to confirm, you're not intending to continue payments? I looked out the window, where slow snowflakes blanketed the street. That's correct. On November 14th, the messages started arriving in rapid bursts. Mom, Emily, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat, and Mandy's been coughing all day. Can you please call me? Dad, this isn't about money anymore. This is family. Mandy, this time more bitter. Fine. Just pretend you were never part of this family. I read each message. Didn't delete them.
Didn't respond.
I simply saved them for myself. A record of where I had once poured out everything, and what I got in return. On the 16th day, Minneapolis was hit by the first snowstorm of the season. News alerts urged everyone to remain indoors. Some areas temporarily lost power. I sat by the window, wrapped in a thick blanket, hands cradling a mug of hot cocoa, the heater humming steadily beside me. Outside, the wind howled through every corner of the city. Part of me wondered, were they all huddled in the living room, wrapped in every blanket they owned? Were they thinking of me, not as a money source, but as a person? The one who had quietly kept that house warm for the past 2 winters? Maybe not. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I set my phone aside, pulled the armchair closer to the heater, and opened the first page of my new novel. My eyes paused on the opening line. You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind. And I smiled. Since the heat was turned off, the messages from my family multiplied with each drop in temperature. I didn't need to check my phone to guess their contents. They all carried the same tone: urgency, accusation, sometimes desperation. On November 17th, the first new text came from Mom. Emily, it's 54 degrees in the house. Your dad keeps coughing and won't take medicine. Can you help? Call someone. I read the message, then placed my phone face down on the kitchen counter. On the stove, a pot of potato and celery soup simmered, its rich aroma filling the small kitchen. I stirred steadily, the warmth fogging up the window panes. That afternoon, the temperature outside dropped to 25 degrees. The snowstorm arrived earlier than expected, with gusts of wind battering the rooftops. But inside my cozy apartment, everything was warm and quiet. I wrapped myself in my favorite sweater, turned on the oven for extra warmth, and poured a cup of cinnamon tea. Somewhere else, I knew they were pulling out every thin blanket in the house, layering clothes, and cranking up the thermostat that no longer had any effect. On November 19th, Dad called 12 times. I didn't answer a single one. A message followed, short and direct. Call me back. This isn't a joke. I gave a dry laugh. To them, I was still the obedient daughter, the one who handled things in the background. They'd forgotten that even kindness has its limits. That same day, Mandy posted a story on social media, a picture of her feet in thick socks with the caption, "Cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer." I simply scrolled past. I didn't feel sorry for her, nor did I find it amusing. I just thought it was accurate. They were living in a freezer they'd locked themselves into the moment they asked me to stay back for Mandy's sake. On November 21st, Mom called again, her voice choked. Emily, it's down to 40 degrees in the house. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are so numb I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something? I was prepping grilled cheese for dinner. The oven glowing orange, and the scent of golden, sizzling butter filled the room.
I didn't reply.
That evening, I ate in silence, the occasional buzz of messages breaking through the crunch of each bite. Every time my phone vibrated, I glanced at it briefly, a habit I developed over the past week, then returned to my meal. I wasn't glad they were suffering, but I wasn't sad either. I was simply living within the boundaries I'd drawn after years of being the financial backup with no say. On November 23rd, 2 days before Thanksgiving, a message from Dad made me pause mid-slice while chopping onions. Emily, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it. I set the knife down and looked out the window. Outside, snow blanketed the porch and the neighbors' cars. I closed my eyes, picturing the old house where I learned to ride a bike, where I wrapped my first Christmas gift. Now it sat cold and silent, but in that vision, I no longer saw myself in the frame. I poured more hot water into the teapot, and as the steam rose, I thought about Mandy, who once told me I was useless for refusing to fund her local fashion magazine idea last year, about Dad, who said I needed to stop being so sensitive when I brought up always being excluded from family meetings, about Mom, who stayed silent every time I was dismissed just to keep the peace. I had been silent long enough. That night, I curled up on the sofa, a book in hand, covered with the light fleece blanket I'd bought last year. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, but it was enough, warm and peaceful. My phone kept ringing, but I still didn't answer, because sometimes the only way for others to recognize your worth is to disappear from the place they always assumed you'd be. On Thanksgiving morning, I woke before sunrise. The pale light slipped through the thin white curtains. Outside, the snow had blanketed the steps, and the city was eerily quiet. No cars, no voices, just the wind whispering over rooftops, a gentle reminder that winter had claimed every corner. I turned on the coffee maker and made myself a simple breakfast, crispy toast with peanut butter and a juicy orange. I didn't prepare turkey, nor did I make the mashed potatoes Mom used to cook. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the old kitchen where the three of us used to squeeze in on holidays. This year, I chose simplicity, not from lack, but because I no longer needed to pretend things were the same. At 10 a.m., I was on the sofa, blanket draped over me, holding a hot cup of coffee, feet stretched to the edge of the table. A documentary I loved was playing on the TV. Everything felt so peaceful. I almost forgot the emotional storm of the past few weeks. Then the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent. I knew who it was before I even stepped into the hallway. I peeked through the peephole and wasn't surprised to see the familiar figure. A thick gray coat, cheeks flushed from cold and frustration, eyes still holding that look I'd known since childhood. Expectation, not apology. I cracked the door slightly, warm air spilling out and hitting my father's gaunt face. "Emily," he said, his breath forming pale clouds. "We need to talk." I leaned against the door frame, my hand still on the knob. "I don't think today's the right day to talk." "You cut the heat," he said flatly. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick. Mandy's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there." I kept my gaze steady on his. "I didn't cut anything. I just stopped paying. Those are two different things." He frowned. "You know we're not good with tech. The contract was under your name. When you canceled, the company didn't notify us because it was never in your name to begin with. I handled everything for 2 years, over $8,000. And then, with one call, I was cut out of dinner to avoid upsetting Mandy. So now, maybe you should handle the rest." He flinched, like he hadn't expected me to remember every number. But I remembered every bill, every skipped meal so I could send money. Every morning I waited at the bus stop in the snow just to make my shift on time. "Emily, don't make this more complicated than it is," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "This is all just a misunderstanding. It's just been a tough year. Mandy's been through a lot." I sighed. "Dad, Mandy's been through a lot, but she put herself there. I'm the one who gets pushed aside. I stayed quiet when she wasted all her savings on a creative academy she quit after 2 months. I stayed quiet when she borrowed money and vanished. But when I got excluded from a family meal because of her fragility, that was enough. No more." He stood there in silence for a few seconds before shaking his head slightly.
His voice was softer now.
"We have no money, Emily. We've sold nearly everything valuable. I called a heating company, but we can't afford the upfront cost. Your mom's running a fever. We can't take it much longer." I could feel the cold creeping through the cracked door, but I didn't move. "You told me I should stay back to keep the peace for Mandy. I did exactly that. I stayed back. As for peace, I don't know about you, but I found mine. He gripped the edge of his hood, eyes narrowing. You're punishing the whole family over one sentence said in frustration. I opened the door a little wider, letting him see the warm apartment behind me. The kitchen glowing, the neatly set table, the soft hum of the heater in the corner. It's not punishment, I said softly. It's just letting you feel the cost of pushing someone aside when you no longer need them. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and walked away. His footsteps crunched through the snow. I closed the door, hearing the lock click into place, clean and firm. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, I poured myself another cup of coffee, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was trembling anymore. The week after Thanksgiving, I received a call from Haley, my cousin who lives in southern Minnesota. One of the few relatives who still kept in touch with me despite not being close to Mandy. Her voice came through the speaker loud and clear, mixed with the sound of wind howling against her window. I just talked to Aunt Claire, Haley began, straight to the point. Things at your house are worse than I thought. I sat down at the dining table, holding a steaming cup of ginger tea, my eyes following the fog rising on the window pane. Mandy's moved out, Haley continued. Her new boyfriend just broke up with her. She crashed at her best friend's place, but they only let her stay for a few days. Now she's sleeping on someone's couch in Eden Prairie. I wasn't surprised. Mandy always had a way of making everything revolve around her until no one was left to spin. The affection she'd relied on all her life had finally scattered with a cold wind. What about my parents? I asked, my voice calm. Aunt's staying in a roadside motel near Highway 52. It's real cheap, the kind people rent by the week with walls as thin as paper. I heard she's got a mild case of pneumonia. And your dad? Haley hesitated before sighing. He sold Grandpa's old watch collection to pay for some temporary heating oil, but it'll only last a few days. I gently tightened my grip around the teacup. That watch collection was the only thing my grandfather had left behind. Once displayed like a treasure in the glass cabinet in the living room, now it was being listed online like items no one even cared to bargain for. You okay, Emily? Haley asked softly.
I'm okay, he replied.
Just a little sad about how it all ended. I'm not, Haley said, her voice firmer. I think you did the right thing. If people only come to you when they need something, that's not family. That's using you. We chatted a little more before hanging up. I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen now dark, reflecting my face in the kitchen light. Not happy. Not angry. Just the cold clarity of someone who had finally stopped, not because they were tired, but because they had gone far enough to realize they owed no one anything anymore. In the days that followed, I slipped back into my regular rhythm. Early mornings with coffee, work shifts at the distribution center from 7 to 3, afternoon stops at the local market for fresh produce and new pastries, evenings spent reading, listening to old jazz records, and occasionally calling Haley to hear stories from outside the family circle. Other than that, I heard nothing from Mandy, Dad, or Mom. The messages had stopped after Dad came to my door. The old house on Ashwood Street was now listed for sale on a local real estate site. Haley said they couldn't afford to keep it, not even with winter just beginning. Sometimes, I dreamed of walking back into that old kitchen, the one where Mom used to bake pumpkin pies, where I did my homework in high school, where Dad laid out the morning paper on the table every day. But in the dream, the kitchen was cold, dim, and no one was there. I just stood quietly, looked around, and gently closed the door behind me. I wasn't angry with them. Truly, I wasn't. But I didn't feel sorry anymore either. Maybe because, in the end, I had been cold and alone too, except I had learned to stand up and build a fire for myself. One night in early December, Haley called again, her voice ringing out between laughter and exasperation. Emily, you won't believe this. Mandy's on the internet telling some sob story about being abandoned by family, like you're the cruelest person alive. I raised an eyebrow. She did what? Posted a video crying, saying you left your family during a crisis. But not a single word about all the money you paid or how they cut you out of Thanksgiving. I chuckled, a small smile without bitterness. Let her talk, I said. People will believe what they want. I don't have to prove anything anymore. Haley laughed loudly. I love this version of you.
Solid.
Unshakable. You're honestly inspiring. After the call, I made myself a cup of hot cocoa, sat by the window, and watched the snow fall slowly under the warm glow of the street lamp. The world outside was still cold, still harsh, but I had learned how to keep myself warm, from simple things, from clear boundaries, and from knowing that sometimes, to live in peace, you have to walk away and never look back. That afternoon, the snow was thick and fluffy, covering the small balcony where I kept a dried lavender pot. The city was silent in the -4-degree cold. No one went outside unless absolutely necessary. I was folding a freshly washed wool scarf when the doorbell rang. At first, I thought it was a delivery, but then came a knock, steady, hesitant, that made me pause. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole.
Mom.
She stood there, bundled in a puffy coat that nearly swallowed her face, a wool scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Snow piled on her shoulders and hat. She clutched an old handbag. Her shoes were buried deep in the snow, looking both weathered and unfamiliar. I hesitated for a few seconds before cracking the door open, leaving a narrow gap between us. "Emily," my mother said softly, her voice trembling. Whether from the cold or something else, I couldn't tell. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." I didn't say anything, just waited in silence. I'd been reflecting a lot on Thanksgiving, on all the winters before. She tightened her hold on the bag, her gaze on the tiled doorstep, where the snow had begun to melt into puddles of water. Then I realized I had been wrong, not just for what I said that day, but for all the years I allowed you to carry everything and acted like it was expected. I tilted my head slightly. For the first time in years, I saw my mother without the mask of strength. No justifications, no polished reasoning, just a woman trying to find her way back from the path she'd chosen. "Mandy regrets it too," she continued. "She says things never should have gotten this far. She says, you don't owe anyone anything." I let out a dry laugh. "Too late, Mom. Everyone says I don't owe anyone anything only after I stopped paying. Only after everything fell apart do I suddenly become someone worth appreciating. That's not it." She shook her head, her voice catching. "I just want you to know I understand now, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't stand by you sooner." I looked at her for a long moment. Those apologies, had they come years ago, might have softened me, but now the wounds no longer bled. They had become scars, and scars don't feel. "You chose Mandy," I said slowly, each word as sharp and cold as the wind. "When I needed a seat at the table, you told me to stay back because Mandy was stressed. When the house was in trouble, I paid the bills, but Mandy was the one being comforted. When I started living for myself, you called it punishment. So what now? You're here to ask me to carry it all again." She looked up, her eyes full of tears. "No, I'm not asking you to come back for anything. I just want you to know you matter, and even if you never forgive me, I accept that." I didn't answer right away. I opened the door a little wider, not to invite her in, but to let her feel the warmth behind me from the apartment I'd kept lit, heated, and peaceful on my own, a stark contrast to where she had come from. "I'm not angry anymore," I said honestly. "But I'm not the same person either. I'm not the last bond holding the family together. I've stopped doing that, and I'm not going back." She tightened her grip on her bag, then nodded. "I understand." I didn't close the door immediately. We stood there for a few more seconds, saying nothing, letting the wind blow through the silence. Then she stepped back and turned away. I watched her walk off, her figure shrinking in the snow. When I closed the door, I didn't feel the lightness I thought I would, but there was no regret either, just a warm certainty, like the glow of the lamp in my apartment, that I had made the right choice. I returned to the sofa, pulled the blanket over myself, and resumed the old jazz track I'd paused. As the saxophone played, I knew, for the first time in years, I no longer needed permission to live my own life. January passed in a soft, white hush of snowfall. The city lay frozen in bitter cold, and I continued living at the quiet pace I'd chosen. My apartment stayed warm thanks to the small heater by the window and the moments I spent reheating soup, toasting bread, or knitting scarves on lazy weekends. There were no more messages from Mom. The last time she came was right after Thanksgiving, and since then, I hadn't heard a word. No blame, no begging, not even the usual New Year greetings she used to send, those generic ones with a picture. I didn't feel sad about it. In fact, I felt relieved. That silence wasn't scary. It was like fresh air after a storm that had lasted for years. Haley still gave me updates each week, as if she were the only remaining bridge between me and the rest of the family. I saw Mandy post asking for help on a community forum. Haley said during our most recent call, she mentioned that Mandy had lost her job and was looking for temporary housing. There was something about cracks in family relationships, same old deflecting. I didn't say anything. I just switched my phone to speaker and kept chopping onions in the kitchen. The aroma of sautéed onions filled the room, overpowering the story being told. Uncle Mark is trying to sell his car, Haley added. That old SUV is still running fine. I heard he wants the money to pay off some overdue bills. Aunt Claire moved in with a relative in Des Moines. She said she needs time to rethink how she raised her kids. Haley chuckled bitterly on the other end. A little late. Yeah, I answered calmly, but perhaps better late than never. As time went on, things that I once struggled to understand became clearer. Not everyone changes, and not everyone is worth hoping they will. Some things, once broken, are better left where they fell, like cracks in winter ice, best left unstepped on, not patched. I no longer thought about Mandy every night, no longer checked social media to see who was saying what, and I certainly no longer felt the need to explain to the world what I did right or wrong. I just lived. Truly. Every morning, waking up in this cozy apartment reminded me that I was standing on ground I chose for myself, not on a shaky foundation built from someone else's expectations. At the end of January, I stopped by the used bookstore down the block. The shop owner recognized me instantly. Haven't seen you in a while, he said cheerfully. Braving the cold, huh? I smiled and picked out a novel about women who left their families to start over. When I got home, I placed the book on the table, boiled water for tea, and sat by the fireplace. The fire glowed bright orange, flickering against the exposed brick wall. I pulled the wool blanket higher and stared into the flames, steady, quiet, persistent, just like me. Somewhere out there, the old house was probably still cold. Maybe they were borrowing space heaters from neighbors. Maybe Mandy was filling out aid applications. Maybe my mother still curled up every night in 3 blankets, thinking about those dinners when we were all together and the people who no longer wanted to sit at that table. As for me, I no longer belonged to that. Back then, the fire crackled in agreement. I reached for my tea, steam blurring my vision, though my heart had never been clearer. Winter would last, snow would fall, but this time, I wouldn't be the one shivering. I had chosen peace, and I didn't regret it. From my story, I've learned that not all blood ties are worth preserving at any cost. Some boundaries, once crossed too many times, must be redrawn with finality. I once believed sacrifice meant love, but in truth, unconditional sacrifice only teaches others to devalue your worth. Now, I no longer seek validation from my family. I live for myself, and that is the freest thing I've ever done. What do you think about Emily's decision? Was she too harsh, or was it what she needed to protect herself? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more emotional family stories to come.